Welcome to the Silicon Fox podcast, where we explore the habits and stories of high performers. I'm your host, Mitchell Eschner. Well, Steve, thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.
Oh, I'm real excited. I'm real excited to be on it. A lot of things to talk about nowadays.
There are always so many things to talk about, but with you, we'll try to keep it as focused as we can. I always like to start these, and maybe this is where it'll get the least focus, but I always like to start these by giving you the chance to just intro yourself. There's a lot of things that you've been able to accomplish, but just a quick background on you and some of the things that you've done before we dive into this world of healthcare and what's going on today.
Yeah, maybe the best way to start is that I've really never followed any rule, and every job I've taken, people told me not to take. So, I actually started my career as a DJ. I was a broadcast journalism major, and because I was good at memorizing stuff, I had a chemistry minor. I got fired from my first DJ job, midnight to 5 at WYSP in Philadelphia, as little Stevie Kent, and in a weird way, I went back to my university and said, well, you're not going to be a DJ. You can take the MedCats. I took the MedCats. I became a doctor. I probably wrote the only honest personal statement in the history of the universe. And the only reason I got into medical school was because my DJ world, because the person that interviewed me had heard me on the radio and said he was an obstetrician. He said, I almost missed some deliveries listening to your stories. Became a doctor, became a private practice obstetrician, delivered about 1,500 babies in Allentown in Philadelphia. 97% of OBGYNs were male at that time. The number one performed procedure was hysterectomy, removing the uterus, followed closely by C-section. I realized there was something wrong with that, since most of the books, Barnes and Noble, were what my hysterectomy did to me, how hysterectomy ruined my life. So I took an 80% pay cut and went into academics and did some of the early work on psychologic and sexual effects of hysterectomy. Became an academic, became a chair of OB. Similar thing happened in the 90s where docs were complaining about business. And I realized that if I can deliver a 9-pound baby, I can probably figure out business. So I got my MBA at Wharton. Got about $1 million grant to look at what makes stocks different than, depending on the audience, either other people or normal people. Wrote a cold call letter to the CEO of Tenet when they took over the Philadelphia entities that they needed me because I was pretty brash and stupid at that time. And Tenet said, well, we don't need you. But Drexel, who had taken over the university, said, we need you. So all of a sudden I became a dean, and I was the dean at Drexel University College of Medicine. And then got asked to become, in essence, the inaugural permanent dean at University of South Florida College of Medicine, which interestingly is not in South Florida. It's in Northwest Florida, which tells you a lot about the logic of Florida. But I became the dean and CEO of USF Health. And then I became the first president of the university and CEO of the health system at Jefferson in Philadelphia. We went from a 2-hospital system to an 18-hospital system. We merged our 200-year-old health science university with the number 3 design university, created an MD Masters in Design. And instead of trying to compete with Penn on NIH funding and U.S. News and World Report, I said, what if we're a 200-year-old academic medical center thinking like a startup company? So that didn't impress the NIH, but it impressed people like Hemant Taneja and Ben Horowitz and Andy Lamont. Became friendly with Hemant Taneja. We wrote a book together called On Healthcare, a manifesto for health assurance, which has, in some respects, become a guidebook and actually spawned the whole General Catalyst health assurance piece. And then after 9 years at Jefferson, we went from a $1.5 billion company to an $18 billion company with 18 hospitals, a 2-campus university, and an insurance company. I went and became an executive in residence at General Catalyst, and now I serve there. I help lead global innovation at Sheba Medical Center, and I'm board chair of 2 healthcare public companies. One's called Teleflex, which is a New York Stock Exchange medical device company, and the other's called DocGo, which is a NASDAQ healthcare and any address company. And I still DJ on Miami yachts, and I DJ for HLTH. So I still get back to my roots. And one of the books I'm most proud of is a book called Feeling All Right, How the Message in the Music Can Make Healthcare Healthier, where I took 50 songs, starting with Courage to Change, of what people like you need to be thinking about when you think about the new healthcare.
One thing that fascinated me, one, hearing this all being said, and then kind of in a lot of the preparation for this show and this podcast, was what drives you. A lot of this is kind of a plethora of different things but all of it has impact in some way, shape, or form. So before we dive into like the granular of healthcare, I just want to understand you a bit better. What drove you to make these changes? Was it more life happened to you, or you took it in your hands and you were interested in being agentic about it?
Yeah, I probably haven't been like, that self-reflective. I think I probably, I'm 72 years old, so, it was before a lot of the drugs, but I probably had some combination of ADD and OCD, which actually is not a bad combo if you figure out how to do it. I think I got tied to my seat, when I was in 6th grade. I was pre-Adderall, pre-Ritalin, what most, folks are on. But I think a lot of it honestly is I love taking a no limits approach. Like even in my personal life, I run 9 marathons. I tore my hamstring tendons in June, all 3 of them while I was training. uh, I was on a brace and for about 8 weeks. And, now I'm training for the Honolulu Marathon, and it would be real, real easy to give up, and just say, hey, all right, well, that was nice. And I was just not good at that. So I think a lot of it is, I love somebody telling me, yeah, I'm sure like a lot of people, I love somebody telling me I can't do something. Like if you want me to take a job, just tell me I can't do it. And that's what's driven me. You know, um,
What about it is fascinating though. It's like it's multifaceted in different industries, and I guess a question there is when you take on new challenges, going from chair, dean, DJ, again, all of the above. Um, At what point do you ever think, or do you ever think that a complete antithetical approach could be wrong? Right. I think one common trap that happens. We have a lot of entrepreneurs on this podcast that constantly are contrarian thinkers and do things that are very antithetical to the norm, and that's actually the asymmetry that causes them to build large businesses. But what often happens is when that approach is always taken, once in a while, it's just like it becomes the norm for the person to do so, and it's not always the right scenario. How do you think about evaluating that both in business and health and in your life?
and Mitchell, I think that's a great question. And I think what tends to happen, and I see it in some of the companies that I work with, and I certainly see it in the health system and academic business, is we tend to surround ourselves with people like us. So entrepreneurs tend to surround themselves with entrepreneurs. One of my Wharton professors gave me great advice. He said, "You should always have 5 people under you that think they can do a better job than you, and 3 that are right." So, so I ran almost a $10 billion company. I don't know how to open Excel. Like literally, I take it off my computer so I can get the extra 69 kilobytes because I just don't know how it works, you know. And so I surrounded myself with a lot of people who had been good provosts or good operators. And I didn't pretend I was a good operator. I was damn good at figuring out what's going to be obvious 10 years from now and bringing it to Jefferson or USF today. And what that does is it gets you surrounded by people who will tell you what you're not going to do or where you're going wrong, right? So, you know, I don't get that much sleep, so I'd have like cabinet meetings where I'd get up, and I'd say, So here's the 7 things I decided at 3 o'clock in the morning we're going to do." And and I'd leave, and my chief of staff would go like, "Could you guys wait for a minute?" And they go, "All right, 5 of those 7 are like, I don't know what they are. They're like opiate-induced dreams that Klasko had and don't even think of them. But those 2, we can actually start to look at. So, Bruce, you do this, and John, you do that. So I think where founders sometimes go wrong, and frankly, where health system CEOs sometimes go wrong, is they they get so caught up on where they started that they're really not good at reversing course, and nobody wants to tell them that. So a lot of my role in my VCs and advisors is to tell them that, because I know what's out there. I mean, I'll give you an example. Every CEO I talk to in 2026 says, "You know what, Steve? We are tired of putting all the Lego pieces together for all the point solutions that you guys come up with. Like, why can't you consolidate?" Like, I'm on the board of 3 or 4 women's health companies. Well, and we start talking about founder ego, and they say, "Well, yeah, well, that's great, but you want to sell to me, and you think your company's worth a few $100 million? I don't give a darn about your founder ego. This is what it's going to take to get us to look at this differently." So, so when I first got to General Catalyst, Mitchell, it was right after we had sold Livongo for $18.4 billion, and everybody's 20 some years old, with degrees from Stanford and MIT. It's like, why is grandpa here? Now you fast forward and, it's a different market. And I'm like Mr. Miyagi sometimes in Karate Kid. You remember that guy, paint the
Yeah,
fence?
yeah.
It's
Mhm.
like we just found out we have to be scalable and sustainable. So I think that there's a positive thing happening, at least in the companies I work with, of everyone's starting to ask me, how do we become more relevant for somebody who's running a large system or a large insurance company, instead of assuming that your technology is great and that those people are clueless. So I think it's really a good time for bringing that together. By the way, that's what happened in academics about 20 years ago. It used to be somebody would say, my research interest is X. I don't know if it'll ever come to anything, and they'd get a grant. Now we have, translational research. What are you trying to solve is what the NIH wants to hear first, before they'll give you money for your research.
Yeah, and that's a big step, and a lot of these points that you're making are quite relevant, so it's interesting to hear, to me and people that I know in a lot of the conversations we've had. What's the how? You talk about, like, you don't, like, open Excel, and again, just kinda wanna flesh out this point here
Yeah.
as we kinda get to understand you before we jump into health. Um, what's the how? So you're what you're very good at is understanding the vision where the world's gonna be. Y how do you do it? Is it just come to you, or do you think through ways of really understanding people and interpreting as to what they actually mean when what they're saying is different? What's the how behind that?
I think it's um, in essence doing the opposite of what most people do. Let me give you a real live example.
Yeah,
We merged our 200-year-old, incredibly conservative academic medical center with the number three fashion design university in the country. Now that, like, would have seemed to make no sense. And in fact, people confuse me of bringing my personal life into my professional life because I had met my wife on Match.com and she was the associate publisher of Vogue. So you got, an
okay.
obstetrician and a fashion design. All right, Steve, that's enough of this. It was after we did 5 health system mergers. But it started with a conversation with that president because he had started Jiffy Lube and then became president of the university, a design university. Um, that was supposed to be a 15-minute conversation, and we got along. And it started with, "Okay, Steve, so, good first date. I guess we should try a pilot." By the way, I hate pilots, but anyhow, we should start a pilot and then go from there. I said, "Okay, why don't we start with a discussion about the opposite? What if we got married? What if we merged? And then let's go down." And he had the kind of mindset, like I said, young guy had started Jiffy Lube that said, "Wow, okay, it's not what I expected. Okay, but let's start there, and we can always go down." And I think that's how I've always looked at it. So, when I met Hemant, and it wasn't like, "Oh, maybe we'll do something with one or two of your companies." It's, how can how what if a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and a CEO of an academic medical center really merged? We had a GC person on our cabinet, and nobody really done that before. So, and I'll give you one example of that. We're doing our budget, and my chief growth officer goes, "Hey, Steve, if you can give me like $4 million for digital health advertising, I think we get a 0.5% market share from Penn," which was our biggest competitor. All right, well, that's pretty boring, but okay. About 4 agenda items later, Dan Goldsmith, the guy from GC Tendo, says, "Oh, we did a survey, and 15% of the people that try to get an appointment at Jefferson never get one. Either they're waiting too long on the phone, or it takes too long to get them an appointment, or whatever." So it took me like 3 more agenda items to go, "Wait a second. Chuck, you want me to spend $5 million so I can get somebody from Penn to want to call Jefferson to get an appointment and not get one, and get really pissed off, and then probably either go back to Penn or Temple. I got an idea. How about if I spend that $5 million giving it to Tendo to create a digital front door? And when that number gets down to 2%, then I'll give you money for digital advertising." So instead of that whole digital world being an other, it became core to what we did.
Fascinating. Got it. Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's also pretty indicative of your process, which is very interesting, to understand. Well, I wanna dive a little bit into healthcare with you. I think that's a good way to kinda set the scene as to, a little bit of your background as to how you think starting really high level, healthcare is pretty broken. I mean, you've written books about certain things. You've taken pretty, contrarian bets here, and you're on working with GC, who's obviously taken some really great bets that have played out with businesses um, that have been contrarian and started to succeed and make differences in the healthcare industry. Why do you think it's so broken today? Beyond the very basic answers that we're hearing of the lobbying of pharma and maybe these kinds of things, like going a little bit deeper, why do we think it's so broken today in a country that has such a large spend in healthcare?
Yeah, so in my book, Feeling All Right, How the Message and the Music Can Make Healthcare Healthier, the first two songs I started with were Sia's Courage to Change, which we don't have, and Simon & Garfunkel's Keep the Customer Satisfied, which we don't do. There were 48 other songs, but you could start with them. Look, I think before I started at Jefferson, I gave a talk, and I was the second speaker. The first was a guy named Austin Goolsbee, who's a great economist. He was President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. And so this was in 2013, Mitchell. And somewhere in that talk in 2013, he said, it was right before I started at Jefferson, the two things you don't want to be running because the leaders are clueless and they're the only things where costs are going up and outcomes are going down are academics and healthcare. And everybody's applauding. And I get an intro as a futurist. And I said, well, damn, I just took a job in academic healthcare. So I'm
Yeah.
obviously a really lousy futurist, according to Austin. But that's true. And Chrissy Farr just sent out a thing last week or so where literally, even to 2025, academic costs have skyrocketed, outcomes by a lot of parameters have stayed the same or going down. Healthcare. So why is that?
Yeah.
Which is what you asked. So for one thing, we don't really care about our customers, and we're allowed not to care about our customers. In most situations, whether it's government or most of the people they're selling, their customers they feel are pharma, industry, hospitals. So nobody's incented to transform. I mean, all you have to look at, Mitchell, is what happened after the Affordable Act passed, Affordable Care Act. One of my mentors, a guy named Bill Kissick, when I went to Wharton, he wrote a book, this is 45 years ago, called Medicine's Dilemmas, Infinite Needs, Finite Resources. He could have written that today. He was the
Yeah.
first one to talk about that iron triangle of access, quality, and cost. You remember ninth grade geometry? You increase access, you're either going to increase cost or decrease quality, unless you're willing, and he said this back in the 80s, unless you're willing to disrupt the system, and disruption is painful. What he told me, and this has stuck with me forever, if anybody ever tells you they're going to increase access, increase quality, and decrease cost, and it's not going to be painful, they're lying. So all we have to think about is healthcare policy in the last, 16 years. President Obama, after the ACA, said, good news, the ACA will increase access, increase quality, and decrease cost, and it won't be painful. That is a direct quote. Trump said, mine will be fantastic, terrific, unbelievable, and really
Yeah.
huge. And it was none of the four. Okay. So the fact is, it's a simple math problem. Who's going to have pain? So if you were a logical investor, Mitchell, and the ACA got passed, and you thought about any other industry that had disrupted, Amazon and retail, Uber, with taxis, you would have said, oh my God, I got to sell all my middleman stocks, insurers, PBMs. The number one stock to have bought until very recently, other than Apple, from the time the ACA was done, was United Healthcare. Now, how can that be? How can a middleman who basically, is there between, you are the patient, Mitchell. I am your doctor. Well, most likely I'm not your doctor because I'm an obstetrician, but
Yeah.
you're the patient. I am your doctor. You have no financial relationship with me. You have a financial relationship with a third party that you, in most cases, did not choose. Your employer chose that. And your employer chose that not for what's best for Mitchell, but for what might be cheapest or whatever. Hospitals are saying, in the past at least, well, look, I can be 5% more efficient and just hand that over to the insurer. And the insurer said, that's okay. I'll just charge the employer 9% more. So nowhere Has anybody said, gosh, you know, how do we make this best? Not for patients. And one of the things I talk about all the time, stop using the word patient. When I was at Jefferson, I said, how are we relevant to the 97% of people in Philadelphia that don't wake up in the morning thinking they're a patient? They're a person that might have diabetes, congestive heart failure. And that's not just marketing. That's nobody wants to wake up and say, I'm a patient. So
Yeah.
how can I be relevant to them? And by the way, if Jefferson is relevant to that person every day through our digital tools, etc., then when they do get sick, I won't need to advertise because they're already part of my club. So a lot of our growing, and now 32 hospitals, was because we decided to be relevant to whatever your ethnicity was. We had the Philadelphia Collaborative for Health Equity. We want to be your partner in your health. It wasn't the advertisement of if you have pancreatic cancer, come to us, you know, but if you were looking at us as your partner in health and you had the app, and God forbid you did have some symptoms, pancreatic cancer, you wouldn't go looking around in the digital yellow pages to see where you should go.
Are you a health coach or running a health course and looking to level up your client's experience? With Cyphox Health at-home blood test, you can deliver lab-quality blood work right to your client's door. Seamlessly ship samples back for fast and actionable results. Personalize every consult with the data that matters. Clients who complete a Cyphox test are 60% more likely to enroll in a paid program after their consult compared to those who only join a sales call. If you're ready to give your clients the edge, go to cyphoxhealth.com/partner. And as a Silicon Fox podcast listener, enjoy 10% off your first bulk order.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, and that kind of spurs a question that I think you may have a really interesting take on, both the length and time in industry and the first principles approach of forecasting the future. But when I have these conversations, I hear a lot of people in really relevant, high power positions that have the similar take and say we're broken because of these things. Show me incentives; they'll show you the outcomes. It's a massive incentive flaw, etc. But there's a lot of people to some extent now and for the past shortish period of time saying it. And then what we see, if you kind of look at outcomes, we see that there are companies being built from zero, becoming billion-dollar companies, solving some small thing as what you said, like they're not centralizing everything and there's the founder, the ego, and is saying, I'm going to solve this one problem, solve it really well. And it kind of begs the question of, do you think healthcare and this incentive system and structure will get solved by death by like 1,000 cuts? But at the same time, what I'm kind of starting to see is that they're not really organized cuts. And so a cut happens and then someone does something really useful and value-based care, whatever you name it. And then the broader system and structure comes in and then we'll patch it. And you don't have time. And the founder won, the investors won, everyone kind of won. But if you look at it long term, maybe the company that did that 10 years ago now it still doesn't have the same outcomes, right? There's very few true generational businesses that have stood the course of time while prioritizing impact as its first component. How do you think about forecasting that as to actually evoke change? And have we seen change over the last 40 years that has been net positive? Or is it constantly a cycle of someone does something and it gets broken?
Yeah. So I'll answer your second question first.
Yeah.
I like to use this quote from Jason Kidd. I don't know if you're an NBA fan, but Jason was a point guard, and he went to the Dallas Mavericks. I think they were 24-52, and he said he got real excited. He said, "I'm going to turn this team around 360 degrees." I've been a healthcare leader for 40 years, and we've turned healthcare around 360 degrees. A lot of people have made money, but so the answer to your second question is in 2026 compared to 1996, have we done a whole lot better around access, quality, and cost? No. Now, what I would tell you is that we've had amazing strides for individual patients. The way I would put this, probably age myself, but we have Star Wars technology for an individual obstetric patient I might take care of in a Fred Flintstone healthcare delivery system. So our technology around CAR T cells and taking care of people with cancer for individual patients has been amazing, but our healthcare delivery system is still incredibly broken. So what changes that? Which is your first question. I've been waiting for it to happen, but I think it's going to happen. And that is, there was a movie called Network where the big line was, "I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore." Um, and I use that line in my latest book, Patient No Longer. I think younger patients, especially, are having their mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it any longer moment. Um, and some of it is technology, like people that come from my ilk of, I wonder if patients will want to use AI. Um, you know, and when I talk at the Consumer Electronics Show to 27-year-olds, damn, I'd much rather talk to AI than a goddamn arrogant doctor, who's making me wait in the waiting room. Yeah, of course I'm going to use AI. I do it for everything else. So as that gets better and better, and you look at, companies like Hippocratic AI, which is a GC company, or Ellipsis Health, or some of those where, you know, I know at Hippo, we have this one situation where a patient went to her doc and said, it was Rachel, the AI nurse, can I see Rachel? She's so much nicer than the nurses in your office, so like we're going to get there. Right. And once we get there, a good part of my time, Mitchell, has been, what does that mean to us that are humans? So, when I graduated from Wharton, I got an almost $1 million grant to look at what makes doctors different than, depending on the audience, either other people or normal people, and how we handle change. I mean, think about how asinine this is. In 2026, we by and large still accept doctors based on science GPA, MedCats, and organic chemistry grades. And somehow we're amazed doctors aren't more empathetic, communicative, and creative. Like, who cares if you can memorize the Krebs cycle, right? I mean, like this is going to do that a lot better than I could ever do it. Right.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I'm spending a lot of my money in endowing is a Humanics Institute at Fairleigh Dickinson University, which is, what are the skill sets around data literacy, technological literacy, and human literacy? One of the things we did at Jefferson when we merged our design university and our health science university is we had our medical students take creativity courses.
Hmm.
Today, I am getting my master's in experimental literature at Northwestern University
I saw that. Yeah.
because
Wow.
literally, as I age, I think I think people are wrong that the way you don't start to get dementia is doing crossword puzzles. I think the way you do that is to start to read Kafka and Vonnegut and Le Guin and some of those, and start to think about other worlds, and hey, boy, things are a lot better at Earthsea in health than they are in the United States. And one of the books I wrote was called Bless This Mess, a picture story of healthcare in America. I wrote it with a children's illustrator. And what we would do is, and it got people really upset, but we would take 9 planets that had it better than us. And I remember one planet, it was Calaria 9. They had the bub rule. Believable, understandable bill rule. And what it was, if you went to a hospital in Calaria 9 and you got a bill that a 11-year-old of average intelligence couldn't read, you didn't have to pay it. And, try looking at a ridiculous
Yeah.
bill you get from any I mean, you couldn't make a Saturday Night Live thing, like that. So, and why is that in 2026? Can you imagine getting a bill like that in Amazon? I ordered I ordered 3 things, and you get a 7-page bill with all the, yeah, but we had to, I ordered these orange ear pods, and this is what the paint cost, and this is what, that's literally what we do. Oh, and by the way, it took us 2 sticks to get your thing in, but so we barcoded I mean, it's asking, oh, but don't worry about it, Steve, because somebody else is paying it. Your insurers
Yeah.
are paying it, or the government's paying it. So, and one more thing, even what we call people is a joke. When I was younger and practicing, there were insurers, there were drug companies, and there were hospitals. Okay. Nobody likes insurers, like any place. So now they're payers. Payers sound so much better, but they're not payers. There's only 3 payers: government, people, and employers. We're payers. Okay. Drug companies, nobody likes drug companies, right? I mean, it's drug dealers, right? We're pharma. Pharma
Yeah.
is research. Pharma is all the good stuff, right? And hospitals, we're not hospitals. We're health. We're health. We're your health. Yeah, but we make all our money from you being sick. And if all of you got healthy, we'd be bankrupt. So, I mean, so when you get back to why isn't this working, it's really, really, really not hard to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, at least it seems like we've made strides in marketing. It's a big change. But do you think that the point that you made, in this answer of, combining and teaching physician empathy and these kinds of things and retraining that, does that still solve the question? Because to your point, in the last 40 years, technology has gotten much better. And let's say that physicians now get much better and much better listening and empathizing. Maybe that creates net healthier people. Does that still solve the kind of systemic question here as to how a lot of this stuff collapses and gets restructured? Or is that still part of this death by a thousand cuts?
Well, I really think that the answer is a lot what Haymont and I wrote about in the book on healthcare back in 2020, that now, General Catalyst has envisioned, and it's not just General Catalyst, there are others, but when you think about General Catalyst acquiring a health system, Summa, when you think about General Catalyst creating their health assurance partnerships, what they announced with WellSpan, I'll be with the CEO of WellSpan in Philadelphia talking to 7 or 8 CEOs. I think that's what we're starting to see, Mitchell, is that no, it can't just be we're out there, either if you're OpenAI or Anthropic, or it can't just be we're a VC. I mean, General Catalyst is not a VC. In fact, we call it VC Beyond. We're in our healthcare. We are a healthcare transformation company, and in order to be a healthcare transformation company, you need to spend a lot more time with the folks that are actually doing the healthcare.
Yeah.
So there's no better way to get into that than being in Akron, Ohio, and proving that you can actually do this. And it's not just the technology; it's bringing in the people, etc. So I think it's going to be a combination. I think we will get to a steady state of what AI, what robots do, and what humans have to do. And when I was trying to develop Jefferson's strategy, I would talk to people from Target or Walmart, and this is what I found. When Amazon disrupted that industry, there were some people that said, "Oh my God, nobody's ever going to a store again." There was a chain called Circuit City which sold a lot of electronics, and they went all in and couldn't they couldn't compete with Amazon. There were others that said, "What a stupid fad, this e-retail stuff, People are always gonna wanna spend, park 10 miles away on the day after Thanksgiving and fight over Cabbage Patch dolls. Think Sears and Penny's." Target and Walmart said, "We're damn good at what we do, but we have to be just as good as Amazon at these stuff." So that's how I looked at me, and even in our relationship with General Catalyst and others. Somebody had pancreatic cancer. We had one of the best pancreatic cancer surgeons, still do, in the country. They wanted to see Dr. Yo. They didn't care what our digital strategy was, what our TV looked like, what the food was like. They were going to live longer if they went to our hospital or a similar hospital. But that 97% of people that we just talked about earlier, I want it to be relevant to them too. And I think that's what you're going to see start to change, because primary care is such a great example. 5, 6, 7 years ago, you say primary care, I don't want primary care. They lose money. You can't make money on primary care. Well, Amir Rubin figured out how to sell his company for about $2.8 billion. Well, Chen didn't do so bad with Chen Med. Oak Street hasn't done so poorly. And all that is the things that we said we can't make money. A lot of the companies I'm working now are trying to do the same thing with consumer health. Instead of saying, "Oh, we're a health system, we're not in consumer health," we're going to create the same kind of, "Oh, okay, good. You don't do it. We'll do it." Because consumers are going to want to be able to know, and they're going to go to Anthropic, and they're going to go to OpenAI, and they're going to go to others about, I have osteoporosis. What calcium should I use? Right? So if we're not willing to do that, that's great. We'll just spawn companies. I believe we, as health systems, and I'm working with some companies that do that, ought to partner on those kind of things. To partner with Anthropic and OpenAI and others, so that we're not fighting it and not forcing them to do it on their own.
So I love training, but getting to the gym isn't always in the cards. Between work, calls, and life stuff, sometimes you just need something at home that actually works. That's why I've been into AMP. Amp is a smart home gym that replaces a ton of traditional equipment without any of the clutter. It's sleek, modern, premium, the kind of thing that actually looks good on your wall instead of collecting dust in a corner. And the whole thing is controlled with one smart dial. There's no complicated setup, no learning curve, you just go. The app is like having a personal trainer with you. It guides you step by step through over 500 movements. You can do strength, HIIT, Pilates, yoga, and mobility, and workouts range from 5 minutes to a full hour, so it fits whatever your day looks like. That variety is what keeps it from getting stale. And honestly, what I appreciate most is how it removes the friction. There's no commute, no waiting for equipment, and no excuses. It's made for busy people, small spaces, and anyone who just wants fitness to feel simpler. That consistency piece is everything, and AMP makes it so easy to actually show up. Check it out at joinamp.com. That's joinamp.com. Joinamp.com. But this does create a system, and I guess it's super in line and consistent with what you're saying and what you're actually doing. But this does create a system that is quote unquote vertically integrated, right? You own the hospital system, you own the patient interaction because you have a digital presence, and then maybe even you somehow include the payment component of how that's structured, and now you win. But then, I guess the broader point that I'm trying to understand from my perspective is if you build this great tool for diagnostics and you're in line with this awesome trajectory of AI improving diagnostics, but the payers, insurers, whatever we call them, are super unwilling to contribute, and now it becomes cash pay no longer accessible to general population, or whatever the specific nuance of it is. Unless you own the full stack as who's paying, who's delivering, and who really owns the full scope of care with specialists included and preventative and all the above, it becomes a bit complicated because then you need to rely on Medicare to cover the cost of this really frontier digital infrastructure. So I'm curious, because again, it seems like you guys are doing that with acquiring health systems and these kinds of things, but that seems to be the biggest challenge.
Well, what we haven't had, and I think your logic holds as long as things stay the way they are. So, let me give you like an example. One of the last things we did 7 acquisitions, and then, in the hospital side, but we acquired a Medicaid and Medicare Advantage insurance company. Okay, so this is real life stuff. So we would look at, as the CEO of Jefferson, we would look at people that were underinsured that would come into my ER 6 times a year with asthma. Now, here's the rub. You lose $10,000 every time that person comes in real money, right? You don't need a Wharton MBA to know if you're losing $10,000 a visit, you can't make that up in volume, right? So we would figure out as a hospital owner, how do I give that care and spend less and lose less? Okay, fast forward. We now have a Medicaid insurance company. The home health person that goes out there says, 97% of those people that come to your ER with asthma have mold. Now, all of a sudden, it makes sense for me to hire a handyman or handywoman to take care of their mold. I save lots of money. I save the insurance company a lot of money. The patient's getting better care at home. And you get rid of those perverse incentives. So I saved the money from not losing $10,000 times 6 patient come in. The insurer who's paying the premium saves a lot of money because they're having to pay me to come in. Now, I own that insurance company. But I think what you're seeing, and General Catalyst and others are starting to create some of those linkages, we need payer-provider alignment.
Yep.
We can't have payers, get 17 cents on the dollar to make sure the people that pay for the care get the care and provide the care can't talk to each other. That was the old way. Once you have that payer-provider alignment, there is enough money. We spend $4 trillion, closer to $5 trillion. And, I think one of the things that just frustrates the hell out of me is how uncreative, even with some of the, folks that have come in recently, how uncreative we are on the government side. Think about the fight we're having now with the shutdown. Okay. Everything we've talked about, Mitchell, is there's 2 polar things going on between the Republicans and Democrats. We're basically coming to the realization that the whole thing is broken and it's about to implode. We spend 18% of our GDP. It's going to go up to 19%. That's 2-3 times more than anybody else. We can't keep doing it. That's been decided, right? Because place is going under. Okay. So the 2 creative alternatives that we've been given in 2026 is, well, on the Democratic side, Let's not change anything because that might really upset some of the people that give us a lot of money. So let's just pretend we still have COVID and send all that money we did during COVID. That's basically the Democratic position. Okay. The Republican position is, oh, yeah, we don't really want to change anything either. We don't really have the courage to change because, yeah, they give us money too. So, I got an idea, and we don't like to add more government money. So let's just cut off some people from getting care. That is literally, Mitch, you couldn't make that up in a really bad Jemison science fiction dystopian or Margaret Atwood novel. That's the best we can get, right?
Yeah.
And but I mean, and I don't think I'm being hyperbolic here. I mean, I mean, I can't watch anymore. I mean, it's not to say we don't have pilots. So I think the answer is going to be that, what you're starting to see with some of these new partnerships, you know, GC and Sumo and WellSpan, I think, Mayo and OpenAI, I mean, you're starting to see those kind of things. One of the companies that I'm on the board of is DocGo, has 12,000 ambulances, but it's not just ambulances, it's healthcare at any address. So literally we go out, we might be giving somebody a vaccine for an insurance company and see that they're Yosemite, they have osteoporosis and every one of the rugs is loose. That's a hip fracture waiting to happen.
Yeah.
So,
Actually,
so our folks just go to the insurer and say, look, we'll tape down the rugs. I mean, that's the kind of thing that needs to happen. When you talk about the vertical integration is fine if there's competition and the overall goal is to decrease costs, increase access, and increase quality. But again, that's disruptive. So Amazon has Amazon stores, whether or not they work or not. Target and Walmart are every bit as good on the east side as Amazon. That's great vertical integration because, I can be a Walmart person, decide when I want to go to the store and when I want to do it on E. I think it is interesting, by the way, that they haven't been able to figure out health. I mean, one of the things that
Yeah.
5 years ago we were talking about, oh my God, Walmart, when Haven started, remember Haven? It was
Yeah.
Berkshire, Amazon, I think Berkshire, Amazon, and JP Morgan, right? And it was all the healthcare stocks went down 20% because Atul Gawande was going to run it on Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays because he was going to do neurosurgery on Thursdays and Fridays. And, that's going to take over healthcare. And I remember that week I gave a talk for the AHA. I said, Dr. Klasko, why are you even going to work? Haven's going to take over healthcare. And I said, I look at Haven like the Loch Ness Monster. If I ever saw it, I'd be scared. I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime. So think about it. How could Amazon, JP Morgan, and Berkshire, with unlimited resources, and somebody smart like Atul Gawande, not make a difference? How could, Amazon Health or Walmart or CVS, that have said, we're going to take over primary care, minute clinics, and, how, even One Medical, I mean, has not made money for their acquirer. So, how is that? The problem is that you can't in healthcare just take the stuff you want to take. I mean, you can. It's called plastic surgery,
Yeah.
but or dermatology. But if you're going to say you're going to take care of people, you have to have that continuum. So that's what I loved about what we were doing in the places that I ran is to say, yeah, we are the most we are the sick care place. But if we can get our act together and then partner with the right insurers, the right VCs, the right companies like DocGo. I mean, we were the first joint partner of DocGo at Jefferson that are sending those ambulances out. Then I can provide better care at a lower cost with a good user experience. That's my new competition. Not doing ads that we have more research and I think in every industry you've needed a disruptor. We haven't had too many yet. I think that's why the Suma experiment, the WellSpan experiment, I think is going to be interesting. And I think there are others around the country that are starting that also.
Yeah, and I mean, so just you flesh out the point, like, why do you think they didn't work? It was because these, like, platforms, Walmart's attempts and all these things, because there was no continuous care of just owning the patient experience through and through?
It's incredibly simple. There was a quote in 1908 from Upton Sinclair. It's hard to get someone to do something when their salary depends upon them not doing it.
Hmm,
So when I created at Jefferson, we created this four-pillar model: academic, clinical, innovation, and philanthropy. Innovation is sort of a hobby to most places, right? Everybody says, we're all about innovation. I go, oh, you're all about innovation? Who does your head of innovation report to? Well, they report to somebody, reports to somebody, reports to somebody, reports to the dean. Oh, so you're not all about innovation.
yeah.
So one of the controversial things I did, we had four equal pillars, even though, dollars weren't equal. And I would take the provost for our two campus university and say, 50% of your salary is going to be based on how the clinical, innovation, and philanthropy pillar do. Oh, and head
So
of our 18 hospitals, 50% of your salary is going to be how the academic, innovation, and philanthropy do. And philanthropy person, yeah, it's all about raising money, but 50% of your salary is going to be based on academic, clinical, quality, et cetera. So you think that got people talking to each other at a different level? You know, and that led to, I mean, on the philanthropy side, we were raising about $25 million a year, got to $250 million a year. Why? Because people like Bernie Marcus, who never really done much in Philadelphia, gave us $110 million to create the first um, uh, academic center for integrative and alternative health in an academic medical center. We created the Marcus Center for Integrative Health. How did that happen? Because the philanthropy people were talking to the provost, who
mm,
really wasn't that
wow.
into integrative health, but they were, look, we'll do it the right way. And Bernie saw that those things were able to be coordinated. So, I think the answer to your question is, it started with the first question you asked me. I mean, I'm not smarter than anybody else. I just start with a no limits approach. I start with what's the most extreme thing I could do. Um, and then even how we used to talk to our lawyers, right? So I was talking to a group of lawyers, said, Jefferson had been a place where good ideas went to die. Now all of a sudden you're top 20 innovation place. Did you have to hire all new lawyers? And I said, no, I just asked a different question. We used to ask, can I do this? And honestly, Mitchell, 90% of the time I say, no, and here's why. So I just started to ask, I'm crazy, right? So this is what I'm going to do. Tell me how I can do this and stay out of jail. I get 3 pages about why I shouldn't do it. And then the last page would be, well, if you're going to do it, here's how you do it. So I would just skip to the 4th page. The ones that didn't have a 4th page, I would then not do. So I think some of it is recognizing that you are broken. And the biggest risk, if there's one thing that people listening to this take out of this, the biggest risk in healthcare in February of 2026 is not taking huge risks, because it's so screwed up. And,
That's fair.
it's just so messed up from a cost, access, quality point of view. So if you're sitting there and you're a really smart business person and you decide to be on a board of a health system and you say that's risky, you need to relook back and say, if I look anything like I look 5 years from now, we're dead.
Yeah.
That's what's risky. And part of the problem is, you have nonprofit health system boards. You have all these really brilliant people, but they tend to be McDonald's owners, McLaren dealers. And then they get to their nonprofit board. It's like 6th grade student council. They're arguing about whether it's going to be the Beach Boys or the Spinners for the gala. One of the things I love about my current role is on the boards I'm on, and I'm on, about 7 or 8 boards. Like, we're surrounded by really smart people. Like, I'm on the board of Paradigm Health, which is one of the
Yeah.
companies, GC and F Prime. It's revolutionizing clinical research using AI and really transforming it. But the board is Ken Frazier, the former CEO of Merck, Karen Knudsen, who used to work for me, the former CEO of the American Cancer Society, Elena Vibach, who leads life sciences for GC, myself, some amazing investors from F Prime and others. So you go to that board meeting and oh damn, I'm the runt of the litter. You know,
Yeah.
you with some of these health system boards, it's not that people aren't smart or want to do the right thing. They just don't know your business, but they're your bosses. And I think that that's part of the problem.
When people talk about energy, recovery, and performance, they jump straight to training or stacking supplements. But here's what I've learned: if your gut health isn't dialed in, none of that stuff works the way that it should. That's the piece that most people miss. That's why I've been using Momentous Fiber Plus. Momentous Fiber Plus is a complete 3-in-1 formula with soluble fiber, insoluble fiber, and prebiotic resistant starch. It's designed to feed you good gut bacteria, improve digestion, and help stabilize blood sugar so you get steady energy without the spikes and crashes. What I appreciate about Momentous is they don't cut corners. Like everything Momentous makes, Fiber Plus is built with a science first formulation, clean and minimal ingredients, and no artificial additives or artificial flavors. Every product is independently testified and certified by NSF for sport or Inform for sport, meaning it's tested for contaminants, heavy metals, banned substances, and verified for label accuracy. Right now, Momentous is offering our listeners up to 35% off your first order with promo code SiliconFox. Head to livemomentous.com and use promo code SiliconFox for up to 35% off your order. That's livemomentous.com, promo code SiliconFox, SiliconFox. Yeah, I really loved what you said, and it was fascinating to hear this payment incentive structure. I'm actually seeing it in microcosms, in different industries and in a much, much smaller scale, at least that I operate on. Like funny to feel like this venture firm that led our seed round does this thing where like they basically everyone gets equity in each other's companies at this certain time of the fund to kind of incentivize this exact thing. And that's fascinating to hear that that's done. I mean, especially if it's not common, I think that's a really big takeaway that I hope people pull out of it is making that like true but definitionally cross-functional where you are incentivized to help the broader org in every bit of purpose and be completely vertically integrated. And that does yield clearly much better outcomes. And the second thing that I really love that you just said, and actually want to kind of segue into the health equity topic that you talk a lot about, is this, you send a doctor in and they know that there's like the loose rugs and that can cause, these problems. To my knowledge, I guess I wasn't around at the time, but like a lot of the way people talk about the healthcare industry, years ago, the physician patient relationship was a relationship. It was you knew the family and you knew who they were. And it was like this true relationship that was kind of built where you kind of knew things going in, you knew how people operate, what they wanted to hear and how they wanted to, maybe hear information. And it does seem like that's really changed into a much more kind of robotic process because obviously massive physician overload and just all of these things. That to me is fascinating. If a physician can come or whoever the person that comes and has the ability to properly assess, because if they're wrong, that's a problem, but properly assess that, hey, something as simple as just taping down these rugs is going to save both so much money, is going to save outcomes, and it's simple. How do you think about these types of things being done in health equity? I know you talk a lot about health equity, and this seems like a massive component because someone may just not know. There's an access to knowledge problem that they should be doing that. How do you think about that actually deploying on scale?
Yeah. So in my new book I'm writing with Jesse Beagle, who just took the job of I think health partnerships in OpenAI. Um, it's called Swifty Startups and the Singularity. I come back from 2035. I'm the chief digital health officer for President Taylor Swift because the Swifties have become a political party. We could do worse. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure a lot of people have done worse. Um, and our healthcare motto is make healthcare tailored and make it swift, neither of which was true in 2026. So I think the answer to your question is this. It's a combination of things that has to happen. And I think in some respects, I like the word used in microcosms, it's starting to happen. The whole issue of doctors as captains of the ship has to change. I mean, when I was in Florida, I got out of the Florida Medical Association because one of their number one initiatives was that doctors of nursing practice couldn't call themselves doctors. I mean, that's so asinine because, first of all, most of those doctors of nursing practice who really probably spent more time clinically than many of the medical students were going out to rural areas and doing primary care. So that's the first thing. We have to get away from, this, I am the most academic doctor, so by definition, I'm the smartest, even though I'm more expensive. That's number one. Number two, I think the concept of not having payer provider alignment that doesn't mean you have to own an insurance company or insurer has to own health systems, but that this whole concept of I have 7 different insurers and they all have different contracts and I'm going to go out and that's going to become archaic. There will be payer provider alignment, so that things like .go will start to make sense. I think the third thing that will start to happen is, and as much as the current president talks about this, it hasn't happened yet. I should be able, as a large health system, be able to negotiate drug prices, right? I mean, I can negotiate everything else. Pharma is still like the number one cost for me, cancer drugs, et cetera, and, I'm on the board of Teleflex, which is a medical device company. I can negotiate with Teleflex for my 18 hospitals, what deal they're going to give me, but I can't negotiate with pharma. That was based on this archaic thing that if we don't allow pharma to do retail prices, they won't do research. That's crazy. So, there are some incredibly logical steps and then the fourth thing is, and we say these words, but nobody really means it, is real transparency, right? I mean, think about anything you can do. You want to go on a trip, you want to read a book, you can get to 10 different sites, see what people like you think about it, right? And make a decision. You have no idea what the quality is. I did this study, honest to God, Mitchell, where I wanted to get an MRI of my knee. And I just pretended that I was going to pay for it. And I called 6 different MRI things. And I said, so I want to get an MRI, I want to get an appointment. What will it cost? Well, what's your insurance? I said, well, I just want to know what it'll cost. I don't want to tell you my insurance. I want to know what it's going to cost. And literally I would get shunned to 4 different people, and are you a journalist? No, I'm a human with a knee. And I want to get, and then the last one, I just got so frustrated. I said, all right, I'm maybe I'm not articulate, and I said, I have a knee. You have an MRI machine. It was like a Seinfeld episode. I want to put my knee in your MRI machine, and I'd like some combination of a human and robot to tell me what it is. And oh, by the way, I'm a doctor, so you can actually send it to me. There's no HIPAA thing. What will that cost? And she hung up on me.
Wow.
Now, just take that and imagine doing that in anything else. And how ridiculous that would be. It was like the Seinfeld episode where he goes to the car rental place and he, I don't know if you remember this, but they say, oh, I'm sorry, we're out of cars. He goes, no, I have a reservation. Here's how it works. I do the reservation. You have a car. I walk in, but it was really like that. So, I mean, some of these things, I guess where I get frustrated, some of these things are not that difficult. We have to want to do them. And I want to get back to what I said before. We need to get to the point, and people your generation will be much better than people my generation who have way too much respect for doctors and hospitals. Get to the point where people just aren't going to accept that. Once you have people not accepting it, and once you have some very obvious different type of things that are really doing that alignment, and that becomes an aha, like an Amazon did, or look at Uber is such a perfect example. You might not be old enough, but you got in a taxi. I mean, first of all, they would profile you, they would, and it was like whatever they charged, and they were crazy, and they didn't have to be nice to you, and you don't have cash, you want a card, and they'd kick you out, right? Uber comes, and all of a sudden there's Curb, there's this. I mean, forget the Waymos of the world, So,
Yeah.
so I mean, so I think you will start to see those examples And more people will say, why can't you be like that system that's brought together the insurer, the digital piece, et cetera? I mean, I'll say about Jefferson, we didn't have it totally right, but we went from 2 hospitals to now it's 32 hospitals. Why did all those people join Jefferson? It wasn't because we paid them a lot of money. It was because they wanted to be part of that healthcare at any address club instead of the old way of saying, I'm the academic medical center. In fact, when we did our acquisitions, we went from being a hub and spoke to a hub and hub.
Mm.
What my board called the Klasko hubba hubba mentality, where, like instead of us being the hub and you being a spoke, nobody wants to be a spoke. Our goal is to keep patients as close to where their communities are and send the services out there. Back then, 2013, that was revolutionary. But I think that's where things are going to go. And when I say out there, it starts at home. It's not
Yeah.
hospital home. Hospital home is a farce. I mean, most people, especially underserved people, don't want to have their IVs, done at home. But healthcare at any address, using a combination of avatars, AI, and humans, starting at home, and that's going to be the next wave. The genius of Livongo, by the way, which sold for $18 billion, at the right time to sell for $18 billion, was, what was for diabetes, which is one of the most common things. What Mongo said when we were partnered with him is, look, Klasko can only treat you like a patient. Come to my outpatient center, come to my urgent care center, come to my ER, come to my hospital. And by the way, when you need them, we'll partner with Klasko. But we want to be your invisible pet friend for the person that has diabetes for the 97% of the time you don't need Klasko. And then we're aligned with Jefferson or Penn when you need that. That's where we'll get to. So people won't say, I'm a Jefferson patient. I use this combination digital, DocGo, Noom, Nico, whatever it is, or a ring. I had a bypass in 2023. One more example.
Yeah.
This of how it can be fixed. I had a bypass in 23. I had it done at one of the places we acquired, Einstein, the Montgomery campus in Pennsylvania. I live in New York and Miami. I go to New York. They got my home care all set up. I get a call, like 5 calls. You need home care, you need home care, you need home care. Okay. Come to my home. It was like the 3rd day. I'm home. Um, well, who's your New York doctor? I don't have a New York doctor. I got it done in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania? It was like I had said Transylvania. I mean, Pennsylvania. Well, we can't. So, I'm sorry, we can't. But you absolutely have to have home care, but you'll have to pay $75 a day. We'll send our DO family doctor or nurse practitioner. So I go, okay, just for the hell of it, I know I need home care, but what am I getting for my $75 a day that they're coming? Well, they will check your heart rate, they will check your blood pressure, and they will check that your wound isn't getting more red. I said, well, I don't mean to be rude, but I have an Oura ring that checks my heart rate every second and my heart rate variability, and I can look that up at any time. I live on 45 East 22nd Street next to 5 CVS and Walgreens, where I can just stick my hand in and get a blood pressure like 12 times a day. Oh,
Yeah.
and my wife isn't a doctor, but she's a fashion design person. She's pretty good at colors. She could probably see if my wound is getting a little redder. And they went nuts, but you need home care. I mean, I never had home care, and I did my entire rehab using my Oura ring and walking and sending the data to my cardiologist. Now, we're not that far from that. It's just putting that all together and having it make sense for the hospital and the health system and Aura to work together so that they're not losing all this money because they're not doing ridiculous cardiac rehab where I would have waited 3 times a week, in a waiting room so they could stick all this stuff on me and I can walk slowly on a treadmill, even though, in the past I've run marathons and that kind of thing. I mean, so
It's fascinating.
I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because nothing I'm saying is science fiction. Everything I'm saying, the pieces exist. The incentives don't exist, and we haven't been able to put it together yet. And I think again, you're starting to see some of those examples of trying to put it together that are coming from almost every sector. The innovative insurers are starting to do that. The innovative entrepreneurs and VCs are starting to do that. The innovative health systems are starting to do that. Um, um, and I think that's what's exciting.
Yeah, I mean that's huge and also crazy example story, etc. Um, one of the things I'm curious about though, as to your point, um, on the health equity side, do you think that, you work a lot with innovators, and do you think that innovators should be focusing immediately on democratization of access or on, because the path of like innovation that it follows, and maybe what you're claiming is that it's already good enough and it's much more of a proper distribution of resources and more of a logistics problem than a tech problem. But, like the iPhone came out and initially was expensive and only maybe elites started with phones and then it became democratized. But even then, you can't claim that everybody still has a phone, right? Today, for the most part, maybe, but maybe it's not the nicest iPhone. And so with like health tech access, if I need a continuous monitoring and Aura, let's call it, for example, even if it's not yet a very clinical tool, it's $400 for one time, it's $7
Right,
a month. Like it's still at the
right.
stage where we can't claim that it's truly accessible for majority Americans. How do you think about that? Should people and entrepreneurs building in this space build immediately for scale and access of everyone, or should they be building initially to kind of test on the people that can afford, and then a downstream effect of as consumerization gets cheaper, access becomes easier?
Yeah, I actually think the latter. I mean, I really think that the winners will be those that can figure out how to make it universally accessible. And some of that, by the way, is education, right? I mean, AI is pretty easy. So, so look, I mean, some of this is the right kind of regulation. Everybody should have broadband, like real broadband, right? I mean, getting back to your cheap iPhones. I mean, one of the most absurd times in my life in healthcare was during COVID, before the vaccine. Um, I live in Philadelphia. It's a home of Comcast. We had 5 zip codes that didn't have proper broadband. So if you had broadband, there was Jefferson Connect. We had invested $40 million in telehealth back in 2013, so we were really prepared. Penn, Temple, so you could start to use virtual health, right? Pretty well. If you were an African American person in North Philadelphia in one of those zip codes that didn't have broadband, and you start to get some chest pain, and you go to your wife and say, I don't know, should I go to the ER? And she said, well, I just was on CNN and they said, try not to go to ERs because COVID's there. So maybe, honey, just go to sleep. And let's see how you are in the morning. And you die. That's absurd in America. And that happened all over. What's evil is the fact, and I'm not blaming the companies, it's more the system, that if you listen to any of the quarterly earnings of the insurers that year, the Medicaid insurers, we had our best quarter in the history of the company. Was that 2020, like August to November? Because people we had actuarialized would go to the hospital didn't access those resources. Yeah,
Hmm.
dude, they died.
Yeah,
And you
wow,
had
I
your
didn't
best
know that.
quarter. So, and again, it's a system problem. So to me, part of the issue is where government should be spending their time, I believe, is making sure that everybody has broadband. Right? That should be like a utility. That should be like flushed toilets if you're homed, right? Or electricity, where if you don't have the money, you can get a grant. And it shouldn't just be the private companies saying, "Oh, you can't afford it. We'll give you the shittiest, broadband, and say we're giving it to everybody." It should just be that should be in essence a commodity. That's one example. The second example, spend a lot of money on educating people how to use AI in the language of their choice, in their homes. I would send out ambassadors of how to do that because that's going to get better and better. And so I'll give you like an example. One of the things I'm most proud of with Jefferson, um, there was a person named Sister Mary who created something called Project Home. It was probably the most successful unhoused initiative in the country. It was based in Philadelphia. Sister Mary's hero. I think she's won presidential awards and other things. Anyhow, when we started Jeff Connect in 2014, we made it acceptable to everybody in Project Home. By percentage, and I'm talking about 2014, 2015, because they all had, thanks to President Obama, they all had iPhones, right? So they were our highest percentage users of Jeff Connect.
Well,
Because yes, they were homeless, and yes, but they cared about their kids, and they didn't have access to, go to the ER in many cases, and their kid had an earache, and they could use Jeff Connect. So I think yes, I am optimistic that if we stop talking about it, one of the things we did at Philadelphia Collaborative for Health Equity is 25% of my incentive was based on literally solving 5 healthcare gaps in Philadelphia, none of which I had any control over. So I had to partner with other people. One example is still going on. It turns out the Southeast Asian community of South Philadelphia is one of the most underserved. I actually went out of my office and got some folks to speak and find out why. And we created something called the Bach Clinic. We got a guy named Hans-Jörg Wyss, who I don't think could even spell Philadelphia. He had sold his company to he's Norwegian. Had sold his company to J&J for a few $1 billion, and loved the fact they were doing it, and gave us like $7-8 million to create a Southeast Asian, and because we cared about it, weren't just talking about it. The other thing I think you have to do, Mitchell, is align that strategy. If we're going to be a 200-year-old academic medical center thinking like a startup company, if we're going to really care about equity, you have to align your values. Most health systems have values. They just do a laundry list of 30 values. We had 3 values that we said everybody has to wake up in the morning and think about. Do the right thing, put people first, and be bold and think different. And what was hilarious when we first did that, because that's how I incentivize people, I would have the chairs go, tell me how you're doing the values. Well, here's what we did to do the right thing. Here's what we did to put people first. And they'd stop. I said, there's their one. Oh, were you serious about that be bold and think different stuff? Yeah, we really, really, really were. So you get a 67%. You might be the chair of, medicine. 67% is a C minus. So next time I talk to you, start with be bold and think different. And if you don't make it easy for people, if you don't figure out the incentives so they'll cross, and if you don't consistently send the message every time I talk to anybody in Philadelphia, we're a 200-year-old academic medical center thinking like a startup company, we want to be relevant to you as a person, not as a patient, and you recognize that in order to do that, you have to hire people and do the things that need to do so people aren't scared of the AI or the home health or people knocking at their door, and providing care. And look, and also recognize how people live. One of the comical things was this. We want poor people to have what did they call it back at COVID? We want them to have distance. So you should all be in
yeah.
different rooms. Like that's the best thing to do during COVID. Be in different rooms. Well, if you have 12 people living in a 2-bedroom place, you're probably not going to be in different rooms. If you live in a 7-bedroom house and you have 3 people, yeah, you can have your virtual cocktail parties in different rooms and play whatever games you were playing. So I think that's wanting to solve the problem and recognizing the resources are there, the technology's there. I mean, honestly, that's where I'm spending 90% of my time, because I still have credibility in the traditional healthcare ecosystem. I still have, I get a chance to be a little bit of a horse whisperer between the health system CEO and the amazing folks that are like yourself that are creating new companies, but getting them to talk to each other at a different level.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge deal. I mean, experienced it, and I know that there's a disparity in the communication, so having someone bridge the gap is huge and going to be huge. Yeah, I have so many more questions to ask you, but I know that we'll cut it short here, and I really, really appreciate your time. This has been a lovely conversation. Steve, thank you so much for hopping on the Silicon Fox podcast.